So I'm going to give you 6 techniques, and then we'll take a short tea break. Technique number 1 is simply to interview your customers. I put up the book a moment ago before called Running Lean. It's funny. We have a stack of, I think, 10 copies of that book, and I give it out to anybody that's thinking about doing this kind of work. And some people, I know they don't read it because they say, I say to them, okay, we should do some customer interviews, and they haven't read the book, and I say, okay, let's do it, no problems. And literally, I take their business and I substitute the words into the interview script out of that book. I sit on the phone with them and I say, let's call the customer, and it is exact. I copy it word for word, and I look like a genius consultant, but I'm actually just copying what's out of that book. You can do customer interviews. Thanks, Cass. You can do customer interviews really easily. Just make sure you focus on the problems first before you start to show off your solutions. Next one, wireframes and prototypes. This is showing people visual representations, and so this can either be in paper. This is what it's going to look like. And for a lot of people that you're selling to, actually putting stuff on paper funnily enough, it's quite non-threatening. It's very easy. They don't feel like they've got to sort of gaze at a screen. Paper can actually work really well. Or you can build dummies. You can build pages that, we've done this before where it's just, this system would actually be a $200,000 system, but we build 5 web pages that just click to click to click to click to click and just link to each other, and it allows people to get a feel for what it's going to look like. A concierge service. A concierge service is where you manually perform now what you know you can automate later. Let me give you an example of that. There's a service in the US where I think the way it works is you tell them the basic staples you have in your cupboard, you give them some indications of what you're interested in, and they give you recipes and the remaining food items that you need. So you get a box and you get told what to cook each night, and it kind of just takes the thinking process out of that, and they get to know you, and the suggestions get better and the food gets better. The intention for this business is to be effectively a massive logistical business, to have warehouses that have food and do all the moving of food and have a lot of intelligence around the preparation of recipe recommendations. But they tested this by essentially having some pretty basic online forms where people answered their questions, or they would just talk to them over the phone. And the first run of it, they just went and bought all the food from the supermarket. Now they lost money. They bought cans of beans for $1.50 that they know down the track they can buy for $1. But what it allowed them to do, and a lot of the intelligence, they just had chefs just actually working on the examples, but what it allowed them to do was, for a really modest amount of money, test the concept before they went and did the bigger deal. To give you an example in our space, one of the speakers from this afternoon, Andy from Plexus, his business, effectively what we've built for them is a really sophisticated interface that people running trade promotions, so if you're going to run a competition, it just happens that field is legally quite complex, just in terms of there's lots of legislation, yes, thank you. The laws are quite complex state to state, and the different types of competitions people run are quite complex. And so what we did for them was we built, firstly, all the interface that we were hoping, essentially typically it's a marketing assistant in a marketing function, would be able to use to enter all the data and not to have to brief a lawyer, enter all the data, capture it, and then produce a contract. But we were nervous that people without a legal background would actually give us and get through this process effectively. So the first piece that we did, we literally cut the project in half. The first piece of it, it was like the duck on the water. All the data entry would go there, but it would just save into effectively just a database. And in the background, they would have people, like I just said, this will take 48 hours to create your document. In the background, they just had people going, oh, there's another one. And they were making these contracts. But what it did is it allowed them to prove the business model before we built the back-end document creation piece, which is quite a complex piece to build. So concierge services can work really well to test your market. Halving your market. We're working with a client at the moment that's got a really interesting buyer-seller marketplace that they're trying to set up. And oftentimes my observation in the buyer-seller marketplaces is one side of that equation will be much harder than the other. So in some markets, it's actually really easy to get buyers. In some markets, it's really easy to get sellers, but often the other one will be hard. And so what we're doing in this particular case is we took a project that I think we originally quoted something like $130,000, and I remember the scenario. I sat down with a person and we said, you know, we want to test this thing, and it's got a lot of planned intelligence around matching algorithms and stuff, and we stripped all of that back out, and the quote was still like 80 grand. It was still a lot of money, and we were sitting there, and almost off the whim, we said, well, what about if we only did it for half the market? What about if we just did a registration system that let people log in, fill in their profiles, and because one half of the market's we don't know about, the other half of the market are just rabid and just want the service, and so we know that if we can test that one half of the market, we've probably validated 70% of what we're trying to do. And so we ended up doing a project for, I think it was it was around the $20,000 mark, that this client will be able to roll out, go out and test that market, and if it works, it gives a lot more confidence for what the rest of the project is. And we'll probably learn some things along the way. We'll probably have some changes and some other bits and pieces. So buyer seller markets, halving the market makes sense. Minimum viable products. Who here before today has heard of a minimum viable product? I think it's a pretty common phrase in the industry people have heard about. Okay. This is my experience of what minimum viable products look like to people. We had the conversation and it says, we should build a minimum viable product just to test your market. And people agree to that concept. And what ends up happening though is they get really worried what their friends are going to think about the system. And so minimum in their world is actually the minimum that I'll be proud to tell my brother-in-law about at the Christmas party. And personal pride, and I've seen it lots of times, they don't want to release something that they are going to be embarrassed about. That is not a minimum viable product. A minimum viable product is the minimum you can do to deliver a unit of value and test something with your market. So often if you think about your systems will often have 4 or 5 or 6 key units of value. How could we pick one of those off and get that into the market and start to test that? And I can tell you firsthand, when Content Samurai came out, there was bits of it that I just thought were undercooked. And Eugene, my partner, who is a lot wiser than I, he said, but I want to get real market feedback. He said, I'd like to get paid to build this product. He said, no one tells you what they want more than real paying customers. And so we released a really skinny version of that first up. Test marketing. There will be people in the room who will be uncomfortable with the suggestion I'm about to make. Before we released Content Samurai, we created the most amazing promotional video we could do. We got a video guy in-house and he did a number on it, worked on it for a week. It was a ripper. Showed the product inside and out, had the subscription plans. We did the whole works on it, testimonials saying how great it was, and led people through to a sales page. And to the point where they would put in credit card details. Actually, we didn't actually get them to put in credit card details. We got them to the point where they would put in credit card details. Because we know that we have our stats very well lined up. We know that for a certain number of people who get to that page, we know what sales we will make. We have a large list of about 10,000 people, about 400,000 people. We selected a random sample of 10,000 people and we sent them an email as though the product existed, and we had not written a line of code of the product. It did not exist. And we asked, and we wanted to see how many people would buy it. Can I tell you, after you lose a large chunk of your life and a large chunk of money, it is really reassuring to build something knowing that people are going to buy it before you've actually built it. And so for a lot of people, being able to reach the market is a big issue in your business. You don't know if it's going to work. And so test marketing. Now, the question is it ethical? And I wrestled with that issue because effectively we were testing something that didn't exist. And so we made sure we did really good stuff, like give them free versions of it. Like, thank you, you got to this page. We haven't actually built it yet, but we're going to do so soon. And you got here, so we're going to give you something for free and make up for it. And we got no blowback. We had no issues with people going, you've ripped me off. And from our perspective, and I understand this walks a fine ethical line, but test marketing gave us a lot of confidence.